The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Wyoming plains as Thomas McKenna guided his horse through the rocky canyon. He had been riding for 3 days, searching for stray cattle that had wandered from his small ranch during the spring. Storms. The work was hard and lonely, but Thomas preferred it that way. He had built his homestead with his own hands after leaving behind a life he wanted to forget. Thomas was different from most settlers in the territory, where others saw the native tribes as enemies to be feared or fought. He had learned their languages and tried to understand their ways. His father had been a trader who taught him that respect and fair dealing could prevent more bloodshed than all the cavalry in the West. This philosophy had served Thomas well during his 5 years on the frontier, earning him a reputation as an honest man among both settlers and the Lakota people who lived in the surrounding hills as he rode deeper into the canyon. Thomas heard something that made him pull up short. A woman's voice was crying out, speaking in Lakota. The words were desperate, filled with pain and fear. Thomas had heard enough distress calls in his time to know when someone was in real trouble. He guided his horse toward the sound, moving carefully through the narrow canyon walls. What he found made his blood run cold. A young native woman was trapped beneath a fallen horse, her leg clearly broken. The horse had been shot by someone and was dead. Around her, scattered on the ground, were the bodies of 3 Lakota warriors, who had obviously died defending her. The woman looked up at him with eyes that showed both pain and defiance. She was young, probably no more than 20, with long black hair braided with beautiful beads and wearing a dress decorated with intricate quill work that marked her as someone of high status among her people. Despite her obvious agony, she held herself with dignity and showed no fear at the sight of a white man. Thomas dismounted and approached slowly, his hands visible and empty. In halting Lakota, he said, "I want to help you. I'm a friend." The woman studied his face carefully before responding in surprisingly good English. "You speak our language? Most white men do not bother to learn. My father was a trader. He taught me that understanding leads to peace," Thomas replied, kneeling beside her to examine her trapped leg. "What happened here? White men came looking for gold. They said this was their land now, and we had to leave. My brother and his friends tried to talk to them, to explain that this is sacred ground to our people." Her voice grew bitter. "They started shooting. My horse fell and pinned me here." Thomas could see the rage in her eyes, but also the pain. Her leg was badly broken, and she had been trapped for what looked like hours. Without help soon, she could lose the leg, or even her life. "I need to move this horse to free you," he said gently. "It will hurt, but I have to do it." She nodded, gritting her teeth. "Do what you must." Using his rope and the strength of his own horse, Thomas managed to pull the dead animal away from her leg. The woman bit back a cry of agony as her crushed limb was freed, but she did not make a sound of complaint. Thomas quickly examined the break. It was bad, but not beyond fixing if he could get her to help quickly. "I need to set this leg and get you to someone who can properly care for it. My ranch is closest, but your people would be better healers for this kind of injury." "I am Ayanna," she said through clenched teeth. "My father is Chief Standing Bear of the Northern Lakota. Take me to your ranch. I do not think I could survive." The longer journey home. Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Standing Bear was one of the most respected war chiefs in the territory, known for his wisdom, but also his fierce protection of his people. If this was his daughter, the situation was far more serious than Thomas had realized. "Are you sure?" he asked. "If your father finds out you were hurt on white man's land, my father will want to know I am alive before he decides what to do." "About how I was hurt," Ayanna said firmly. "And you are not like the men who did this. I can see it in your eyes." Thomas worked quickly to splint her leg with materials from his saddlebags, trying to be as gentle as possible. Ayanna bore the pain without complaint, though he could see sweat beading on her forehead from the effort of staying silent. "I have to get you on my horse," he said. "This will hurt worse than anything yet." "I understand," she replied, lifting her carefully. Thomas managed to get Ayanna situated on his horse, her injured leg supported as best he could manage. She was lighter than he expected, but he could feel how much strength it took for her to stay upright in the saddle, as they began the slow journey back to his ranch. Thomas couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. Helping anyone in need was simply the right thing to do, but saving the daughter of a war chief could bring consequences he hadn't considered. The relationship between settlers and the Lakota was tense at best, and Thomas knew that some white men would see his actions as treason while some Lakota might see them as suspicious. "Why are you helping me?" Ayanna asked, as they rode, her voice weak but curious. "Because it's right," Thomas answered simply, "and because I believe your people and mine don't have to be enemies." Ayanna was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father has said the same thing. He believes there might be white men who can be trusted." Perhaps he was right. As Thomas's small ranch came into view in the distance, he couldn't shake the feeling that this day was going to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. He had no idea that by tomorrow, his simple act of kindness would bring 200 Lakota warriors to his door. Thomas's ranch was modest, but well-built, consisting of a sturdy log cabin, a barn, and a small corral where he kept his horses. He had chosen the location carefully, near a clear stream and protected by hills on 3 sides. It was isolated enough to avoid most trouble, but that isolation now felt like a disadvantage as he carried an injured Lakota woman toward his home. Getting Ayanna inside required all of Thomas's care and strength. She had grown weaker during the ride, and he could see that shock was setting in from blood loss and pain. He managed to get her onto his bed, then quickly gathered water and clean cloth to tend to her wounds. "I need to clean these cuts and reset the splint properly," he said, lighting several oil lamps to give himself better light. "Do you have any objections to me removing some of your clothing to tend the wounds?" Ayanna looked at him with eyes that were becoming glassy from pain and exhaustion. "You saved my life. I trust you to preserve my honor as well." Thomas worked carefully and professionally, having learned basic medical skills from a doctor in his former life back east. The leg break was clean, which was fortunate, but there were several deep cuts from the horse's fall that needed attention. As he worked, Ayanna drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring in Lakota. When he finished bandaging her wounds and securing a proper splint, Thomas covered her with his heaviest blanket and prepared some broth from jerked meat. She needed food and rest if she was going to recover properly. "Ayanna," he said gently, supporting her head so she could sip the warm broth, "you need to stay awake long enough to get some food in you." She opened her eyes and managed to drink a little, though her hands shook with the effort. "How long until I can travel? With a break like that? At least 2 weeks before you should even think about it. Maybe longer. My father will be looking for me by then. When I do not return, he will send search parties." Thomas had been trying not to think about that possibility. What will he think when he finds you here? Ayanna was quiet for a moment, considering. It depends on how he finds me. If I am well cared for and treated with respect, he will see that you are an honorable man. If I am harmed or dishonored, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Over the next 3 days, Thomas cared for Ayanna with the dedication he might have shown his own sister. He prepared meals, changed her bandages, and helped her with the basic necessities of recovery, while always maintaining proper respect for her modesty and dignity.
Ow.
During the long hours when she was awake, they talked. Thomas learned that Ayanna was not only Chief Standing Bear's daughter, but also a skilled healer and negotiator among her people. She had been with her brother's hunting party when the gold seekers attacked, trying to establish whether the white men could be reasoned with before her father decided on a more aggressive response. "There are many in our tribe who say, 'all white men are the same,'" she told him, as he helped her eat some stew on the 3rd evening. "They point to broken treaties, to the soldiers who attack our villages. 2 men like those who killed my brother." "And what do you think?" Thomas asked. "I think there are good and bad people in every nation," Ayanna replied thoughtfully. "But it is easier to hate all white men than to try to tell the difference. Hatred is simpler than hope." Thomas found himself drawn not just to Ayanna's beauty, which was considerable, but to her intelligence and wisdom.
Ow.
She spoke 3 languages, fluently knew the healing properties of dozens of plants, and had a clear understanding of the complex politics affecting both their peoples. "Why aren't you married?" he asked one evening. then immediately felt foolish for the personal question. Ayanna smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. The same reason you are not, I think. I have not found a man who sees me as a partner, rather than a prize to be won. On the fourth morning, Thomas was chopping wood outside when he heard the sound that had been haunting his dreams. War drums, distant but unmistakable, echoing off the canyon walls. He dropped his axe and ran inside. Do you hear that? She was already trying to sit up in bed, her face tense with concern. It is my father's war party. They are close. How many men does he usually travel with? Thomas asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. When his daughter is missing. All of them. Perhaps 200 warriors. Thomas felt his stomach drop. 200 Lakota warriors would surround his small ranch like a flood. If they believed he had harmed Ayanna or taken her against her will, no amount of explaining would save him. What should I do? He asked. Help me outside, Ayanna said firmly. If my father sees me hiding in your house, he may think you have dishonored me. But if I greet him properly, standing beside you, he will know I am here by choice. You can barely walk. Your leg will heal. But if there is bloodshed here today, many people will die who do not deserve to. Help me up. Thomas supported Ayanna as she struggled to stand, her face pale with pain but determined. Using a walking stick he had made for her, she managed to hobble to the door. The sound of horses was growing louder. And through the windows, Thomas could see dust clouds rising from multiple directions. The warriors were surrounding the ranch, just as Ayanna had predicted. Thomas, Ayanna said, gripping his arm with surprising strength. When my father arrives, let me speak first. Do not reach for any weapons, even to defend yourself. Show respect, but do not grovel. He will judge you by how you carry yourself in this moment, and if he decides I'm not worthy of his respect, Ayanna looked at him with eyes that held more warmth than he had expected, then I will convince him otherwise. You saved my life and treated me with honor. That should count for something. As the sound of approaching horses grew to a thunder that shook the ground, Thomas realized that this confrontation would determine not just his fate, but possibly the future relationship between his people and Ayanna's. Everything depended on the next few minutes and the judgment of a war chief, who had every reason to see him as an enemy. The thunder of hoofbeats grew louder until it seemed to shake the very ground beneath Thomas's feet. Through the dust and morning haze, he could make out the shapes of mounted warriors emerging from every direction. They moved with the precision of an experienced war party, surrounding his ranch in a perfect circle that left no possibility of escape. Thomas had seen Lakota warriors before, but never like this. These were not the raiding parties or hunting groups that occasionally passed through the territory. This was the full might of Chief Standing Bear's tribe, and they had come prepared for war. Eagle feathers fluttered from their hair, war paint marked their faces, and every man carried weapons that gleamed in the morning sun. Ayanna leaned heavily on her walking stick beside him, but she held her head high with the dignity of her station. Despite her injuries and obvious pain, she radiated the authority of a chief's daughter. Thomas could see that her presence was already having an effect on the approaching warriors. Several had lowered their weapons slightly, confusion replacing the anger in their eyes. From the mass of riders, one figure emerged and rode slowly toward the cabin. Thomas knew immediately that this had to be Chief Standing Bear. The man was tall and powerfully built, probably in his 50s, with gray threading through his long black hair. His face was weathered by years of leadership and warfare, but his eyes were intelligent and calculating rather than simply fierce. He wore a magnificent war bonnet that marked his status, and his horse was painted with symbols that Thomas recognized as marks of honor and achievement. The chief stopped his horse 20 feet from where Thomas and Ayanna stood. For a long moment, father and daughter simply looked at each other. Thomas could see the relief that flashed across the chief's stern features when he confirmed that his daughter was alive and relatively well. "My daughter Standing Bear," said in Lakota, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "We have been searching for you for 4 days. When we found your brother's body and the dead horse, we feared the worst. I am alive because of this man, father," Ayanna replied in the same language, her voice strong despite her injuries. "He found me trapped and brought me to his home to heal." Thomas understood enough of the conversation to follow the basics, but he remained silent, as Ayanna had instructed. Around them, he could feel the tension of 200 warriors waiting to see how their chief would react to finding his daughter in the care of a white man, standing. Bear's gaze turned to Thomas, and Thomas felt as though he were being examined by a hawk deciding whether something was prey or threat. The chief's eyes took in every detail: Thomas's simple clothing, his respectful posture, the fact that his hands were empty and visible, and most importantly, the condition and demeanor of his daughter. "You speak our language," Standing Bear said, switching to English that was more fluent than Thomas had expected. "Some, yes, sir. My father taught me that understanding prevents misunderstandings. Yet you are here alone on land that my people have used for generations. Why?" Thomas chose his words carefully. "I came here looking for peace and a quiet life. I have tried to live respectfully on the land, taking only what I need and offering no harm to anyone. And when you found my daughter trapped and injured, what did you think would happen if you helped her?" It was a test, Thomas realized. The chief was trying to determine whether Thomas had helped Ayanna out of genuine compassion or because he hoped to gain some advantage. "I thought that a person was in pain and needed help," Thomas answered honestly. "I didn't think beyond that until later. And what did you think then?" "That I might be in considerable trouble," Thomas admitted. Drew a murmur that might have been amusement from some of the watching warriors. Standing Bear dismounted from his horse and walked closer. Close enough that Thomas could see the details of his weathered face and the intelligence in his dark eyes. The chief was evaluating not just Thomas's words, but everything about him: his body language, his treatment of Ayanna, the condition of his homestead. "My daughter tells me you cared for her injuries and treated her with respect," Standing Bear. He said, "She also tells me that white men killed her brother and his friends while they tried to negotiate peacefully." "I'm sorry for your loss," Thomas said quietly. "No one should die for trying to talk instead of fight. Yet many of your people seem to prefer fighting to talking." "Many of mine and yours both, I think," Thomas replied. "But not all." Standing Bear nodded slowly, as if Thomas had passed some kind of test. Then he turned to his daughter and spoke in Lakota again. "Tell me exactly what happened, and exactly how this man has treated you." Ayanna straightened, despite her obvious discomfort, and spoke clearly so that all the warriors could hear. She described the attack by the Gold Seekers, her brother's death, and how Thomas had found her trapped beneath her horse. She detailed how he had freed her, treated her injuries, and cared for her with complete propriety for 4 days. "He could have left me to die," she concluded. "He could have taken advantage of my helplessness. Instead, he risked his own safety to help someone he had never met, asking nothing in return." A murmur ran through the assembled warriors as they processed this information. Thomas could see that Ayanna's testimony was having an impact, but he also noticed that several of the younger warriors still looked skeptical and hostile. Standing Bear was quiet for a long time, considering. Finally, he spoke to Thomas again. "My daughter is precious to me beyond words. She is not only my child, but a healer and peacemaker for our people. If you had harmed her or dishonored her, nothing could have saved you from my wrath." "I understand," Thomas said simply. "But you did not harm her. You saved her life and treated her as you would want your own daughter treated. This creates a debt between us." Thomas felt a flicker of hope, but he remained cautious. "I don't want anything from you, Chief Standing Bear. I helped because it was right, not because I expected payment." "That is exactly why you will receive it," Standing Bear replied. "Among my people, honor demands that good deeds be acknowledged and repaid." The chief turned to face his warriors and spoke in a voice that carried to every man in the circle. "This white man has shown honor and compassion to our people. He has proven that not all of his kind are enemies. Let it be known that Thomas McKenna is under the protection of the Lakota. Any who harm him will answer to me." A cheer went up from many. Of the warriors, though, Thomas noticed that not all joined in. Change, he realized, would not come easily or quickly for either of their peoples. But as Standing Bear clasped Thomas's hand in a gesture of respect and friendship, Thomas felt something shift in the world around him. This was more than just a personal alliance. It was the beginning of something that could change the relationship between settlers and the Lakota in ways neither man could yet imagine. The formal ceremony of friendship took place in front of Thomas's cabin, witnessed by 200 Lakota warriors. Chief Standing Bear produced a beautifully carved pipe and shared it with Thomas while speaking words in Lakota that Ayanna translated. As promises of mutual respect and protection, Thomas felt the weight of the moment, understanding that he was participating in something that could reshape relationships between his people and theirs. After the ceremony, Standing Bear surprised Thomas by announcing that the war party would make camp nearby for several days while Ayanna continued to recover. "My daughter is not yet strong enough for the journey home," he explained. "And there are things we must discuss about the men who killed her brother." As the warriors set up their temporary camp in the meadow beyond Thomas's property, Thomas found himself in the strange position of hosting not just an injured woman, but essentially an entire Lakota village. However, he quickly discovered that Standing Bear's people were nothing like the savage enemies described in the newspapers back east. The warriors were disciplined and respectful, asking permission before using his stream for water and offering to share their own supplies rather than burden his limited resources. Several of the older men spoke some English and engaged Thomas in conversations about everything from cattle ranching to the best methods for preserving meat through the winter. "They're not what I expected," Thomas admitted to Ayanna as he helped her walk outside on the second day to sit in the sunshine. "What did you expect?" she asked, settling carefully onto the wooden chair he had brought from inside. "Honestly, what everyone says about war parties? Bloodthirsty raiders who live only for fighting and stealing?" Ayanna smiled sadly. "What do your people say we should expect from white men?" Thomas considered this. "It's probably the same things. That we're all liars and thieves who want to steal your land and destroy your way of life." "Some are," Ayanna said matter-of-factly. "Just as some of our young men are more interested in counting coup and taking horses than in finding peaceful solutions. But most people, I think, just want to live their lives and raise their children in safety." Over the next few days, Thomas found himself drawn into numerous conversations with Standing Bear and his senior warriors. The chief was far more sophisticated than Thomas had imagined, with detailed knowledge of territorial politics, federal, Indian policy, and the economic forces driving westward expansion. "The gold seekers who killed your son," Thomas said during one evening discussion, "they're not from around here. They're probably from one of the mining camps to the south." "Know this," Standing Bear replied. "We also know that more will come. Gold makes white men crazy, and crazy men do not listen to reason. What will you do about it?" Standing Bear was quiet for a moment, staring into the campfire. "That depends on whether I can find white men who are willing to help keep the peace, or whether I must prepare my people for war." Thomas understood the implication.
Now Standing Bear
Was offering him a choice and a responsibility. "What kind of help are you talking about?" "You know both worlds," the chief explained. "You understand our ways, but you are also accepted by your own people. You could serve as a bridge between us, helping to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that lead to bloodshed." "I'm just a rancher," Thomas protested. "I don't have any influence with territorial officials or army commanders." "But you have something more valuable than influence," Ayanna interjected from where she sat nearby. "You have integrity, people. Trust what you say because you have never been known to lie or cheat." Thomas felt the weight of what they were proposing. Serving as an intermediary between settlers and the Lakota would put him in a dangerous position with both sides. There would always be people who saw him as a traitor to his own race, just as there would be Lakota who questioned his loyalty to their cause. "Think about it," Standing Bear said. "But do not take too long to decide. Events are moving quickly, and soon it may be too late for peaceful solutions." On the fourth day, Ayanna was strong enough to take short walks around the ranch, though she still relied heavily on her walking stick. Thomas found himself enjoying her company more than he had enjoyed anyone's in years. She was intelligent, funny, and had a way of seeing the world that challenged his assumptions about everything from politics to philosophy. "Tell me about your life before this," she said, as they sat by the stream watching the water flow over. "The rocks, not much to tell. I was a clerk in a bank back in Philadelphia. Lived in a boarding house, kept other people's books, wore a suit every day, and never saw the sun except on Sundays. What made you leave?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. He hadn't talked about his past with anyone since coming west. I was engaged. To marry the bank president's daughter, nice girl, suitable match, would have given me a comfortable life and social position. But I realized I didn't love her, and she didn't love me. We were just following the path that was expected of us. One day I looked at my future and saw 40 years of pretending to be content with a life that wasn't really mine. Yana nodded understanding. So you came west to find your real life, something like that. Wanted to see if I could build something. With my own hands, make my own choices, succeed or fail, based on my own efforts rather than my family connections. And have you found what you were looking for? Thomas looked at her, sitting gracefully despite her injuries, her dark eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight, and felt something shift in his chest. I'm starting to think I have. The way I expected. That evening, Standing Bear approached Thomas with a serious expression. My daughter's leg is healing well. Tomorrow we must begin the journey home. Thomas felt a stab of disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. Of course, she'll be more comfortable with your own healers. She will. But that is not the only reason we must go. Scouts have brought word that soldiers are riding this way from Fort Collins. Patrol of 20 men, led by an officer who is known for his hatred of all Indians. What do they want? Someone reported seeing our war party in this area. They are coming to investigate and probably to demand that we return to our reservation immediately. Thomas understood the implications. If federal troops found a large group of Lakota warriors camped near a white settler's ranch, they would assume the worst. There could be a battle that would destroy any chance of peace between the two peoples. How long do you have? Thomas asked. We'll be here by midday tomorrow. We must be gone by dawn. That night, Thomas lay awake thinking about Ayana's departure and what it would mean. In just a few days, she had become more important to him than he wanted to admit. He had found in her not just beauty, but intelligence, courage, and a spirit that matched his own desire for a life lived on his own terms. More than that, he realized that Standing Bear's offer to serve as a peacemaker between their peoples appealed to him more than anything he had done since leaving Philadelphia. It would be dangerous and difficult work, but it would also be meaningful in a way keeping books or raising cattle could never be. As dawn approached and he heard the Lakota breaking camp, Thomas made a decision that would change the course of his life forever. Thomas smiled to himself, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, he had found something worth fighting for. Emerged from his cabin just as the first light of dawn was breaking over the mountains. The Lakota camp was already being dismantled, with the efficient precision of people who had done this countless times. Warriors rolled buffalo hide lodges, packed supplies, and prepared horses with movements that spoke of generations of nomadic life. He found Ayana sitting on a log near the stream, carefully braiding her hair while her father's horse grazed nearby. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and he could see something in her eyes that matched the reluctance he felt about this parting. "Your leg feels strong enough for the journey?" Thomas asked, settling beside her on the log. "It will have to be," Ayana replied. "My father is right about the soldiers. Captain Morrison has a reputation for shooting first and asking questions later, especially when it comes to my people." Ayana, Thomas said, then paused, unsure how to express what he was feeling. "These past few days,
Us.
they've meant a great deal to me." She looked at him directly, her dark eyes serious. "To me as well. You have shown me that there are white men who can be trusted, who can see past the color of skin to the person underneath." "I want to accept your father's offer," Thomas said. "To help build bridges between our peoples. That's not the only reason. What is the other reason?" Thomas took a deep breath, because it would mean seeing you again. Because in just a few days, you've become more important to me than anyone has been in my entire life. Ayana was quiet for a moment, then reached out and took his hand. "My father has been watching us," she said softly. "He sees how we look at each other, how we talk together. He is not displeased." "What does that mean?" Before Ayana could answer, Standing Bear approached them. The chief had painted his face for travel and carried himself with the formal dignity of a leader, preparing to move his people through potentially dangerous territory. "Thomas," Standing Bear said, "walk with me." Moved away from the stream, leaving Ayanna to finish her preparations. Standing Bear was quiet for several minutes, seeming to choose his words carefully. "My daughter is precious to me," he finally said. "She is intelligent, brave, and has the respect of our people. Many warriors have asked for her hand, but she has refused them all." Thomas waited, sensing that the chief was building up to something important. "She has refused them because she says she will only marry a man who sees her as an equal partner, not as a prize to be won or a woman to be owned." Standing Bear stopped walking and faced Thomas directly. "I believe she has found such a man. In you." Thomas felt his heart racing. "Chief Standing Bear, I care for your daughter deeply, but I never presumed." "You never presumed because you are a man of honor," Standing Bear said. "That is why I would not object if you were to ask for her hand in marriage." The statement hit Thomas like a physical blow. Marriage to Ayanna would mean joining not just his life to hers, but his fate to that of her people. It would mean children, who belonged to both worlds, but might be fully accepted by neither. It would mean a life of constant challenge and possible danger. It would also mean happiness beyond anything he had ever imagined. "There would be difficulties," Thomas said carefully. "Many difficulties," Standing Bear agreed. "There are those among my people who would never fully trust a white man, just as there are those among yours who would see you as a traitor. Your children would face questions about their identity that other children never face. Would approve such a marriage?" Standing Bear smiled for the first time since Thomas had met him. "I want my daughter to be happy. I also want peace between our peoples. A marriage built on love and respect could serve both purposes." They walked back toward the stream, where the final preparations for departure were being completed. Ayanna looked up expectantly as they approached. "Father?" she asked. "I have told Thomas that if he wishes to ask you a certain question, he has my permission to do so," Standing Bear said. Then he walked away, leaving them alone. Ayanna looked at Thomas with eyes that held both hope and uncertainty. What question would that be? Thomas took her hands in his, feeling the calluses from her work and the strength in her grip. "Ayanna, I know we've only known each other for a few days. I know that marriage between us would bring challenges that most couples never face. But I also know that I've never met anyone who understands me the way you do, or who makes me want to be a better man than I am. Thomas. ... Will you marry me?" he asked simply. "Will you build a life with me that bridges both our worlds?" Ayanna's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." The sound of approaching horses interrupted their moment. Thomas looked up to see dust clouds in the distance. The cavalry patrol was arriving earlier than expected. Standing Bear appeared. At their side immediately, "The soldiers come faster than we thought. We must go now." "What about the ceremony?" Thomas asked. "When will we marry?" "When the seasons change," Standing Bear said. "When the autumn leaves fall. Come to our winter camp in the Black Hills. If you still feel the same. And if my daughter still wants you, we will have a wedding that honors both your traditions and ours." The war party mounted their horses with practiced efficiency. Ayanna had to be helped onto her horse due to her injured leg, but she managed to settle herself with dignity. As the group prepared to ride out, she looked back at Thomas with an expression that promised everything would be different when they met again. 6 months, she called to him. "Find us when the leaves turn gold." "I'll be there," Thomas called. "Back, I promise." As the Lakota disappeared into the canyon, Thomas stood alone in his yard, watching the dust settle. In the distance, he could see the blue uniforms of the approaching cavalry. Soon he would have to explain to suspicious soldiers why there had been a war party camped on his land, and why he was still alive to tell about it. But for now, he simply stood in the morning light, thinking about autumn and gold leaves and a woman who had changed his understanding of what love could mean. The next 6 months would test his commitment to both Ayanna and to the cause of peace between their peoples. Thomas. The cavalry patrol arrived just 20 minutes after the Lakota had disappeared into the canyon. Captain Morrison was exactly what Thomas had expected. A hard-faced man in his 40s with the bearing of someone who had seen too much fighting and trusted to few people. His 20 soldiers spread out around Thomas's ranch with the practiced efficiency of men accustomed to potential ambushes. You, Thomas McKenna? Morrison asked, not bothering to dismount from his horse. I am. Can I do for you, Captain? We had reports of a large war party in this area. Our scouts found signs of at least 100 horses, maybe more. You see anything like that? Thomas chose his words carefully. He had no desire to lie to federal officers, but he also wasn't about to betray Standing Bear's trust. There were some Lakota through here, yes? They were looking for someone who'd gone missing. And you're still alive to tell about it? Morrison's tone was skeptical. Most folks who run into war parties that size don't live to talk about it. They weren't looking for trouble, Captain, just searching for a missing person. Morrison finally dismounted and walked closer to Thomas, his hand resting casually on his pistol. What kind of missing person? A young woman who'd been injured. They found her and took her home. You saw this woman? I did. And where exactly did you see her? This was the moment Thomas had been dreading. Any lie he told could be discovered. But the full truth might put Ayanna and her father in danger. She was here, Thomas said simply, injured and needing help. Morrison's eyes narrowed. What? You're telling me you had a Lakota woman in your house, and then her people came to get her? With 200 warriors, and nobody got hurt? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Son, that's the most ridiculous story I've heard in 20 years of dealing with Indians. They don't just come calling peacefully when one of their women ends up with a white man. Maybe that's because most white men don't treat their women with respect, Thomas said, his temper starting to rise. Morrison's face hardened. You watch your mouth, boy. I'm trying to figure out if you're a fool or a traitor and your attitude isn't helping your case. Honestly, took a deep breath, reminding himself that antagonizing the captain wouldn't help anyone. Captain Morrison, I understand this situation looks strange to you, but I'm telling you the truth. The woman was injured in an attack by gold prospectors. I helped her heal, her people came to get her, and they left peacefully. No shots fired, no threats made. What gold prospectors? The ones who killed her brother and 2 other Lakota men over near Devil's Canyon. They were claim jumpers from down south, probably working the Colorado strikes. Morrison was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Thomas could see that the mention of claim jumpers had gotten his attention. Illegal mining operations were a constant problem for territorial authorities. You know anything more about these prospectors? Only that they shot first and asked questions later when the Lakota tried to negotiate with them about sacred ground? Sacred ground, Morrison scoffed. Indians think every rock and tree is sacred when there's gold underneath it. Maybe so, Thomas said diplomatically, but dead prospectors can't mine gold, and dead soldiers can't keep the peace. It seems like it might be worth trying to talk before shooting. Morrison walked around Thomas's property, examining the ground where the Lakota camp had been. Thomas could see him noting the signs, the careful way the camp had been laid out, the fact that nothing had been damaged or stolen from the ranch, the absence of any evidence of violence. This is all very interesting, McKenna Morrison said. Finally, but I've got orders to keep unauthorized Indians off settled land. Next time you see a war party heading this way, you send word to the fort immediately. That's not a request. Understood, Captain. After the soldiers left, Thomas spent the rest of the summer preparing for his journey to find Ayanna and her people. He sold most of his cattle to neighboring ranchers, arranged for a friend to watch his property, and studied maps of the Black Hills region where Standing Bear had said their winter camp would be located. More importantly, he began serving as the bridge between communities that Standing Bear had suggested. When disputes arose between settlers and local Lakota bands, word somehow got around that Thomas McKenna was a man who could be trusted by both sides. He found himself mediating arguments over water rights, investigating reports of stolen horses, and helping to prevent the kind of misunderstandings that could escalate into violence. The work was exactly as difficult and dangerous as he had expected. There were white settlers who called him an Indian lover and suggested he was betraying his own race. There were also young Lakota warriors who questioned whether any white man could be trusted, regardless of his actions. But gradually, Thomas began to build a reputation for fairness and honesty that earned him respect from both communities. As autumn approached and the leaves began to turn gold in the mountain valleys, Thomas prepared for the most important journey of his life. He packed supplies for a month-long trip, including gifts for Standing Bear and his people, blankets, tools, and medicines that would be valuable in their winter camp. The night before he was scheduled to leave, Thomas sat on his porch looking at the stars and thinking about the path his life had taken. 6 months ago, he had been a lonely rancher, content with his solitary existence. Now he was preparing to marry into a Lakota tribe and dedicate his life to building peace between two peoples who had every reason to distrust each other. He thought about Ayanna, her intelligence, her courage, her smile that could light up a room. He thought about Standing Bear and the trust the chief had placed in him. Most of all, he thought about the future they could build together if they were brave enough to try. The journey to the Black Hills took 2 weeks through increasingly rugged country. Thomas followed the directions Standing Bear had given him, looking for landmarks and signs that would lead him to the winter camp. When he finally crested the ridge that overlooked the hidden valley where the Lakota had settled for the cold months ahead, Thomas felt his breath catch in his throat. The camp was beautiful, dozens of painted lodges arranged in careful patterns, with smoke rising from cooking fires and children playing in the spaces between the tipis. It was a complete community, with all the complexity and organization of any town, but in harmony with the natural landscape around it. As Thomas rode down into the valley, he was met by scouts who recognized him and escorted him toward the center of the camp. People came out of their lodges to watch the white man who had come to marry the chief's daughter, and Thomas could see curiosity, skepticism, and hope in their faces. Then he saw Ayanna emerging from one of the larger lodges, and everything else faded away. She was more beautiful than he had remembered, her leg completely healed, and her smile radiant with joy at seeing him again. She wore a dress of soft white deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork, and her hair was braided with ribbons that caught the afternoon sunlight. "You came," she said simply, as he dismounted from his horse. "I promised I would," Thomas replied. Taking her hands in his, Standing Bear appeared beside his daughter, his weathered face showing approval and satisfaction. "Thomas McKenna, you are welcome in our camp. Are you ready to become part of our family?" Thomas looked at Ayanna, at Standing Bear, at the community of people who were offering to accept him as one of their own despite the differences between their worlds. He thought about the challenges they would face, the prejudice they would encounter, and the work that lay ahead in building bridges between their peoples. Then he smiled and nodded. "I'm ready." The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later, combining Lakota traditions with elements that honored Thomas's heritage, as they exchanged vows in both English and Lakota. It was witnessed by the entire tribe, and blessed by both a Lakota holy man and a traveling preacher who happened to be in the UTE area. Thomas knew that he had found not just love, but purpose. Standing under the vast sky of the Black Hills, holding the hands of the woman who had changed his life, Thomas understood that some bridges are built not with wood and stone, but with courage, trust, and love. The future would bring challenges neither of them could imagine, but they would face them together, as partners in both love and the cause of peace.